Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Reds Minor League Talk. I know I skipped last week, and I really didn't even mean to. I actually sat down in the hotel and I recorded an episode, and it just didn't turn out very well, so I decided I was going to scrap it. And by the time that I really had a chance to decide that I didn't want to go with that episode, I was already basically on my way back home to Cincinnati, so I decided to just deal with it and not have an episode last week. But last week I reached out on Twitter for some questions, and I'll get to those later in this episode, so I definitely am not going to skip over those. I will have answers for those. But as I was getting set up to prepare to record this today, the Reds signed Yovani Gallardo to a major league contract. Now, obviously, this is Reds minor league talk, so that in itself doesn't necessarily warrant talking about, but it did kind of bring about two different minor league moves. To make room on the 40-man roster, the team designated Stuart Turner for assignment to create a spot on the 40-man there. And then on the 25-man roster, the Reds decided to send Zach Weiss down to AAA. Now, that was an option, so that was his first option ever used. So he's still good for two more option seasons after this. So there's no real worry about losing him in I guess in the near future in terms of him being out of options or anything. But I kind of do want to talk about Gallardo a little bit. I don't necessarily have a problem in bringing him in. I guess my issue is, why did they need to sign him to a major league contract? Over the last two seasons, the ERA is over 5.5. His strikeout to walk ratio is under 2-1. He has a relatively high walk rate in that time span, and a really low walk rate in that. Let me rephrase that. He has a low strikeout rate and a high walk rate over the last 2 years. I don't understand why it was required to give him a major league contract. It's the season has already started. He didn't have a job, and he hasn't performed well in the last two seasons. And it's not as if the Reds are in a situation where they just don't have arms to go. Brian Price mentioned that he's going to be used in the bullpen. The Reds have bullpen arms. It's tough to kind of make sense of just handing him that kind of deal. Now, how much money it is, there is no word yet, unless I missed it while I was setting this up. But even if it's just, for the league minimum, it's still tough to wrap my head around why he needed a major league contract. If the Reds had been dealing with, multiple injuries over the last couple of days, and they didn't have somebody healthy to go in the bullpen, maybe at that point it would make more sense. But I don't know. I wrote about it on the site if you want to check out that. I kind of got into reasons why maybe it makes a little bit of sense for them, but my ultimate conclusion was that I don't really understand it from the perspective of giving him a major league contract. But you can check that out if you want to. If not, that's fine too. But let's get into the minor league news a little bit. Stuart Turner, he was on the 40-man roster. I think that generally speaking, we all kind of felt that he was going to be the first guy to go if they needed to make a move. They kept him on the 25-man roster all last year because of the Rule 5 draft. They barely played him, and when he did play, he did not hit well at all. Now, he hasn't hit well in the minor leagues either, so you're kind of at that point where he's the emergency third catcher, and you were hoping to get a little bit better from him last year. It didn't quite work out. In the offseason, the team brought in multiple veteran big league catchers to put in the minor leagues. With Devin Mesoraco being healthy, you don't really necessarily need to carry that third catcher on the 40-man roster if they're not going to be a legitimate prospect. And I think that at this point, Stuart Turner hasn't really shown that he is that kind of guy. So if push comes to shove, and you do need to call up a catcher for an injury reason, or let's say that Devin Mesoraco starts playing well, and you can get some trade value out of him later in the season. Is there really a big difference between Stuart Turner and Tony Cruz or Tony Sanchez, guys that they have in the minor league system right now? I don't think so. And so, it just makes sense that he would be the first guy to go, because realistically, he's kind of a redundant part at this point with the other guys that they do have. Now, where it's tougher to make sense of it is optioning Zach Weiss. I guess since, we go back to he needed a spot on the 25-man roster, and I think that Zach Weiss has the least amount of upper minor league level experience of anybody that's on the roster right now. So from that standpoint, it makes sense. But I feel like Zach kind of earned that spot in spring training, and and it does just go back to they gave him a 25-man roster spot. They gave him a major league contract, so they needed a spot. And so I don't know. I still struggle to try and figure out how Giovanni Gallardo was a better bet than Zach Weiss at this point. Zach Weiss performed very well. Now, granted, he only pitched in Double-A for most of the season. He's never pitched in Triple-A, so you don't really know. But I'm of the position where I'd rather go with the unknown with potential versus the known where, well, the known has been very, very bad for the last 2 years. But the Reds don't pay me to make those kinds of decisions, or, well, I guess the Reds don't pay me at all. So if you're listening, guys, I am willing to take a job, so you will listen to me. But if not, I guess I'm just going to keep talking to you guys and tell you what I like or don't like about the moves that the Reds do make. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at as far as that stuff goes today. I'm going to jump into the questions, and I'm sorry for it being a week late. The video just didn't turn out very well when I recorded it in the hotel room. The audio was kind of iffy, and that's probably my fault. I probably didn't have something set up right, but the video was, I don't know. I just didn't like the way it looked. It didn't work out, whatever. Doesn't matter. So I'm going to get into the questions now. So Jared asked, what were my impressions of Jeter Downs from what I've seen in Goodyear? I really like his swing. I think he's an athletic guy. I still think he's more bat than glove. I didn't get to see a ton of him defensively at shortstop, but what I did see told me probably more likely to be a second baseman. Now, again, it was just a few games, so, you don't really... I don't like making defensive judgments based on 2 or 3 games unless it's overwhelmingly obvious that somebody is out of position and can't handle it. And that wasn't the case with Jeter Downs, but from what I did see, I feel more comfortable saying he's more of a second baseman than a shortstop, especially if he fills out his frame even just a little bit more than where it's at now. But I do like the bat. I did like the hit tools that he was showing, so, really good prospect, but I think that in the long run, probably going to be more of a second baseman than a shortstop. Red Country, has anyone looked to improve, or has anyone improved drastically or even a little bit during the off season? I'm not really sure that anybody really jumped out in terms of, somebody who would just look totally different. Now, I did write on the site, since you asked this question, actually it was earlier today, I kind of made my predictions for the 2018 minor league season, kind of breakout players, guys that I can see, taking that next step forward. But I guess the closest guy to answering this question would be Tyler Stephenson. I only saw him play in 2 games while I was out there, but within the week that I was there, including the games that he played while he was on the road, I stayed in Goodyear the whole time. So for those who don't know, the low A and high A teams, they stay together, and then the Double-A and Triple-A teams stay together. And every other day they alternate which one stays at home and plays in Goodyear, and which one travels to another facility to play their games there. While I was in Goodyear, I believe that Tyler Stephenson hit 4 home runs in the 7 days that I was there. And unfortunately, they were all on the road, so I didn't get to see any of them. But, I knew that they were happening that way, and I was also watching, during batting practice. They do take batting practice, all 4 teams, at the Goodyear facility each year, or each day. He looked a little bit different, a little bit stronger. The ball just flies off that guy's bat. I think that this could be that breakout year, assuming he can stay healthy again. Unfortunately for Tyler, he's dealt with injuries over the last 2 seasons that basically have cost him, 2 years ago, almost the entire season. And then last year, I guess it was probably 40% of the season he lost due to a thumb injury. I talked with him in spring. He said his thumb's feeling great. So hopefully, he can stay healthy this year. And I think that if he does, this really could be the season where he takes that next step forward. Last year he took a step forward when it comes to, hitting for average and in the plate discipline. He walked a lot more and he struck out a little bit less. I think that this could be the year that he breaks out in terms of power. And if he does, really just watch out, because I think he's gonna fly up the prospect rankings if he does. And he's already a quality prospect. So if he really starts to show that power, I think we're talking about a guy who's going to jump into the top 100 prospects in all of baseball. Let's see. Sam wanted to know, how long does Green stay in Arizona before heading to Dayton? Well, that actually, at the time that the first time I recorded this, I said I think we'd probably see him in May. But since then, we found out that he is going to start the year in Dayton when Dayton starts next week. So 0 days, he's going to be in Dayton, and he's going to be in the rotation to start the season. So I think that the more interesting question when it comes to Hunter Green is, how the Reds are going to use him in terms of limiting his innings, what's the pitch count he's going to be on, and kind of how they're going to work that, because realistically the Reds don't like shutting pitchers down at some point in the season, and with the just lack of overall innings and Hunter Green only being 18 years old, they're going to want to keep him. I mean, I haven't spoken with anybody with the Reds about the exact plan for Hunter Green, but I would imagine they're going to want to keep him under 100 innings this year. And if you're going to start pitching him in April at the very beginning, I mean, you're going to have to skip a few starts along the way, and you're going to have to limit him to 4 or 5 innings per outing. So I think that's going to be the interesting thing with Hunter Green this year in terms of, how the Reds handle him along the way, so that they don't have to shut him down in, say, mid-July for the entire season. Dan wants to know, if the Reds did trade Hamilton, who would play center field? Actually today, Saturday, the game starts in 2 hours, which the game will probably be happening by the time that you see this, because it's going to take me a minute to edit this up. But Scott Schebler's playing in center field today. Personally, I think that in larger ballparks, it just makes too much sense to play Billy Hamilton there. I know he can't hit. I'm not a believer that he's ever going to learn to hit much better than he's ever hit before. But in big ballparks, he's still just a difference maker with his defense. Pretty much every park out west, he needs to start in center field every game. In games in, say, Pittsburgh, he needs to play every day. Pittsburgh's got a really big outfield. A place like Washington, a place like Philadelphia, he's the guy that I'd play in center field there. Now, Great American Ballpark, I'd look a lot into playing Scott Schebler and Phillip Ervin in center field there. I think that you've got a lot less space to cover defensively, and so you can get away with a little bit less defense there. And I just think that both of those guys are significantly better hitters. Now, I think that I'd be more comfortable with Phillip Ervin in center field defensively than Scott Schebler, but I don't have a problem playing Scott Schebler there instead of Phillip Ervin at this point. So I think that either one of those guys can cover you in smaller ballparks, but when you get to the larger stadiums, I'd still play Billy Hamilton. If they trade him, then I think that they're probably going to want to acquire someone else to add to the roster who can play center field in the larger ballparks. I think that Scott Schebler would be stretched a little bit there. Probably the same for Phillip Ervin. So we'll have to see. I think that there probably will still be a trade market for Billy Hamilton as the trade deadline approaches. He's a weapon for a lot of teams. Now the question is going to be whether or not the Reds feel they can get good value for somebody who realistically is probably going to be looked at as a bench player for contending teams. So I don't know if they're going to wind up trading him or not because of that, but if they do, I think that they probably would look to acquire a different center fielder, maybe not necessarily in that exact trade for Billy Hamilton, but in one way, shape, or form to get somebody who has that big-time range that can kind of help your pitchers out in larger stadiums. Mike asked about Nick Howard and how he looks. Again, that was another thing that I wrote about. I've got some video up on the site. Now, Mike obviously asked this question before I got a chance to do any of that. But Nick Howard looked good. I would like to see him add a little bit more velocity than what he was showing in the spring. But, reports from last year in Instructional League that he was throwing a little bit harder at that time than he was when I saw him, last week. I think that he's gonna throw a little bit harder than he was throwing in spring training. He was 89, 90, 91. Not everybody peaks in spring training with their velocity. Some guys are still building up, and I think that Nick is probably one of those guys. Now, whether or not he ever gets back to the 94, 95 that he was as a starter that first year that they drafted him, I don't know if that's likely. But if he can just get back to 92, 93 miles an hour, you mix that with his curveball, I think that there's still a chance that he could be a major leaguer with that kind of stuff. So again, I wrote about it. There's some video up on the site, redsminorleagues.com, which it should be at the bottom of this video, so you should see it right there. I don't know why I'm repeating it, but just in case I forget to add it in, because I'm an idiot, and I am an idiot, so don't be confused about that. But yeah, so you can check out the video and see it for yourself. There were some inconsistencies in there, but it's March. You're going to see that. So if he can get back to the guy that he was in terms of control, and he's throwing 92, 93 with that breaking ball, I think that there's still a useful reliever in there. I only saw him pitch twice while I was out there in one inning stints. You don't really know in terms of control Because even when he was struggling with control in the past, he'd have outings where he threw strikes. But what I saw, he looked different than when he was going through his struggles with control. He looked more confident. The mechanics were a little bit better. Just the whole demeanor. And, I'm sure if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen me talk about that kind of stuff when people make, grand observations about guys that, they don't look right. He looks like he's just uncomfortable out there. Yeah, I don't put much into that. But when you've got a guy like Nick Howard who's kind of been through what he's been through, I do put a little bit more into it in a situation like that. I just think that it's a rare instance where I do think that it matters the way that a guy looks on the mound in terms of, the body language and things like that. So I did like the way that he looked in those terms out in Arizona. So we'll see. I definitely don't think he's a guy that we should be writing off yet. But yeah, he's going to have to throw more strikes than he has in the past for sure. But, I think the stuff is still there. So Joe wanted to know how Taylor Tramel has looked. Chances he could be in AAA to begin next year, Major League bound by May 2019. Because he could solve a lot of the center field issues. When I first got out into Arizona, Taylor was nursing a slight injury, but by the end of the time that I was there, he was playing again. He tripled in one of the games that I saw. There's video up on that if you want to see it on the YouTube channel over on the website. I really like the game that Taylor Tramel has. The only lacking tool that he has is his arm, and I think that it's better than he gets credit for sometimes, but it's still a below average arm. But it's plenty for center field. It's not going to be something you're going to be wowed by. It's not something that's going to really stand out. But I've been saying this for a while. If Johnny Damon could play center field with that noodle arm that he had, Taylor Tramel can play center field. You're definitely going to be giving up a little bit with it because it's a below average arm. But again, Johnny Damon couldn't throw the ball 175 feet in the air, so he made it work. If you can hit enough, they'll make it work, and I think that Tramel can definitely hit enough to make that one work. Now, whether he can be ready for AAA to start next year, Major Leagues by 2019 or by May 2019, that's a different question. I think that with the way the Reds have kind of promoted guys, if Taylor Tramel has a good first half this season in Daytona, then they probably will promote him to AA in the second half. Now, if he blows the doors off there, then yeah, I think AAA could be a spot for him to start next year. I still think may be pushing it in terms of Major Leagues next year, but you never know. If he blows the doors off AA and gets started out well in AAA, and the Reds realistically don't have another option for center field, then maybe. But that's a pretty aggressive timeline. I think that sometime in late 2019 is probably more realistic. Maybe a September call up that year. Give him some seasoning. But again, sometimes the player dictates when they're ready. Sometimes the roster at the big league level dictates when a guy gets the call. So we'll see. But I definitely think that May 2019 is probably a bit early for Tramel. But it wouldn't be the most crazy thing ever. The guy's incredibly talented, and he can play baseball. So we'll see, but I would definitely lean on the more cautious side of that one. Another question on center fielder. James wanted to know if there was an update on Jose Siri, his progress, timeline, things like that. I didn't get a chance to talk to Jose while I was out there, but I did see him, and he was walking around, and he had a brace on his hand, and it was like a neoprene brace, and it kind of stabilized his thumb a little bit. But I did talk to some people with the Reds, and it sounds like he's probably not going to be ready maybe until the start of May. They're going to kind of take it and see how it goes, but I was told that there's a chance he may not be ready to start playing until May. So I think that he's probably still going to miss at least a couple more weeks from this point in time. There may be a chance he could play in later April, but I would say probably May is when we're going to see Siri join the team down in Daytona, and we'll kind of have to go from there. Let's see. We've got any updates on the injured guys? Travieso, Hansen, the guy we got from the Rays from Brandon Phillips. We'll start off with the guy that we got from the Rays from Brandon Phillips. That was Andrew McKirahan. The Reds released him at the end of spring training, so a couple of days ago before this question was asked. So again, that's my fault for butchering this whole process and basically getting these questions from 8 days ago. But yeah, so the Reds released him. That's, I mean, I don't know. It's not exactly surprising. He was coming off of his second Tommy John surgery, and a lot of guys don't really come back from that. But last year he did pitch well. Granted, it was rehab stints against rookie ball guys for a guy who's in his late 20s who has pitched in the majors. But I guess I don't know what happened, but he's no longer with the organization. I talked with Travieso while I was out there. Nick had said that he's kind of in between throwing programs right now, coming back from the shoulder surgery. There are different steps and different programs that you go through as you get back to things. But where he's at now is there's a throwing program where you get all of your work in, and then you basically take 3 to 4 weeks off, and then you get in to start throwing bullpens. And right now, or well, at least while I was out there, he may be ready to start actually throwing bullpen sessions now. But he was in that like 3 to 4 week period where he wasn't throwing, and so clearly he's not going to be ready to start the season. But he's at a point now where he's getting ready to start taking that next step. He said he's feeling great, so that's always good. But I'd be surprised if we didn't see him, until mid-season this year. But good news is he says he's feeling good. Everything's going well as far as rehab goes. So hopefully we'll get to see him this year, and he can kind of get back to the guy that he was before he got hurt. Nick Hansen, I was told that he's going to be ready to pitch this season. Clearly he's not going to be joining, say Dayton right off the bat or anything. So I think it's probably going to be more something we see mid-season. But he should be good to go as well. I didn't get to talk to anybody about Rookie Davis. Technically he's on the major league side of things, so didn't really get into anything with him. I didn't see him out there, so I don't have an update on him. And that looks like all of the questions that we had for that. Yeah, so I think I'm just going to cut it off there. I don't know how long this has been going, but I feel like it's probably been about 20 minutes or so, and I don't want these to go too long. I know that you have to sit here and kind of watch this for that long, and I don't blame you for not wanting to look at me for that long or listen to me talk. So I'll cut it off there, and by the time that we record another one of these, minor league season is going to be underway. So we'll have some real baseball to talk about and some things that are, happening on the field that actually count. So I guess I will talk to you next week. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate it. See ya.